away. To the ancient Egyptians, the Nile was the river of life. And look at this magnificent photo from space of the Nile going north up to Cairo and then up to Alexandria at the very top. We see the Mediterranean Sea, and we just see this amazing photo of how the Nile separates the desert and the land, Sinai, and ultimately leads us up to the Mediterranean. But you know what's interesting is that the earthly Nile to the ancient Egyptians was a mirror image of the heavenly Nile. Again, as above, so below. And they referred to the Nile, both the earthly Nile and the Milky Way, as the winding waterway, the winding waterway. And it's very interesting to contemplate where the ancient Egyptians got their knowledge about the Milky Way galaxy. Today you can Google the Milky Way and you will see images such as this of the arcing Milky Way galaxy. Well, of course, the ancient Egyptians didn't have photography, but what they did have is artists who would symbolize the Milky Way as a feminine figure. Nut is what they called her. And here we see Shu uplifting Nut. And we now understand that this is a symbolic of the Milky Way galaxy itself. And we see Nut uplifting the waters and the light, of the Milky Way galaxy. Here in this scene, we see a pharaoh with the feather of Mot, the ostrich feather of Mot, sitting on his knee, preparing. It looks just as if he's sailing into a new zone or web of frequency with Nut arcing above, telling us that this figure is a soul journeying into the afterlife, actually journeying into the Milky Way galaxy. And that's what it was all about for the ancient Egyptians, was this idea of connecting heaven and earth, as above, so below, but also this understanding that in order to journey into the stars, we would have to transform. As the Bible says, flesh and blood can't inherit the kingdom of heaven. And the ancient Egyptians were probably the originators of that concept. And they had this understanding that in order to sail upon the waters of the Milky Way, we ourselves would have to transform ourselves into celestial beings or star beings. And they had a whole system of sacred science, of sacred knowledge, sacred alchemy that was devoted to this transformation. In fact, the ancient Egyptians called their land Chem, which meant the black land. And of course, this is the root of our words chemistry, as well as alchemy, the transformation or purification of the impure into the pure. So very important concepts is what we begin to see on the walls of the temples of ancient Egypt, where we see a pharaoh offering, in this case, the divine bread to the god, to Horus. And what he is saying is, I have achieved the ultimate alchemy. I have manufactured this power substance, the manna, the white powder gold, as Sir Lawrence Gardner would have called it. Over and over again on the walls of the temples of Egypt, you will see a pharaoh offering this conical loaf of bread, symbolic of this higher dimensional substance that indicates that they have performed this ultimate alchemy and are now in the process of transforming themselves from a human into a divine being, into a celestial being, indeed perhaps even into a god. And so no matter where we look throughout ancient Egypt, we're going to find references. Here we are at Karnak in Upper Egypt, where we will see examples, in this case, Hatshepsut. The ancient Egyptians were masters of these alchemical substances, be they the cosmic manna, the bread, as it's called, or oils of transformation. But it was always ultimately not necessarily for earthly purposes that they were developing these substances. It was for this ultimate transformation, that preparing themselves to navigate the afterlife, preparing themselves to enter the Milky Way galaxy and travel for eternity as a celestial being, as a star in the cosmos. So if Egypt is the reflection of the sky, then the divine beings sail on the waters of the great river, which animates the cosmos, the Milky Way, and the deceased, in order to join the celestial fleet, must be provided with a ship and a steering oar. And this is the kind of, to me, the key aspect of the ancient Egyptian transformational science. It was this idea that our soul, in fact, can become a star, and that star soul is, in fact, a ship that can sail for eternity on the waters of life. So, to me, one of the most important symbols that we will encounter throughout our journey together, and certainly throughout ancient Egypt, is this idea of the sacred ship, the sacred boat, the Ark of the Millions of Years, or the Boat of Eternity, which the ancient Egyptians said was crafted by this god being, Ptah, who we're going to be talking about in detail momentarily. So over and over again, you will see a deceased figure sailing into the afterlife with their oar on their ship of eternity as a transformed being. This is one of my favorite examples. It actually comes from the Temple of Medinet Habu in Upper Egypt. So the Nile actually not only symbolized the river of earthly life, it also symbolized the afterlife. And as I said, the ancient Egyptians believed that just souls, or perfected souls, righteous souls, pure souls, came to reside in the celestial Nile as a star. In particular, the object of their quest was to sail through the belt of Orion's Gate. The belt of Orion's Gate was considered a gateway into the field or the dimension of the blessed. And it was viewed actually as a two-way portal or gateway, with the divine beings, celestial beings, coming and going through Orion's gateway. This idea of the ship, as I say, is kind of actually my obsession, if you will, in my journeys to Egypt. And we'll talk more about this as we continue. And by way of introduction, I wanted to take you into the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, which is one of the most bewildering places you can ever imagine visiting. It's intoxicating to go in there. The energy is so high with the vibrations coming off many of the stone artifacts, and just the sense of wonder of where you are and the ability that we have. And here we are in the Cairo Museum where they're just kind of stacked up. And the good news is that, of course, the Egyptians are building a new Great Egyptian Museum, the Great Egyptian Museum, or GEM. The Japanese people gave them billions of dollars to build this museum, and it's due to be completed sometime in the next several years, which is absolutely breathtaking. And we're going to talk about Akhenaten more in the second part of our webinar tomorrow. But for the moment, I'm calling your attention to the Pyramidion, which is what you see there, indicated by my GoldenEye of Horus with the wormhole. And you know, you look at something like this and you see the absolute mastery of the perfection of its construction. You see the double awakened eyes, you see the winged serpent. But what catches my attention more than anything is down here along the bottom strip where we see these hieroglyphics. And in there in the middle, you see our guy on a boat. That is what it's all about for me, is all of the ancient Egyptian metaphysics, I believe, is a Stargate metaphysics. And it's all about the transformation of individuals, of humans, into celestial beings, and granting them passage on the celestial ship, the ship of eternity, the Ark of the Millions of Years. And for me, it's all about how do we get from where we're at here on board that ship so that we can then sail with the divine beings through Orion's Gate on into the field or the dimension of the blessed. Coming back to our original scene here in the Cairo Museum, I'm now calling your attention to this incredible sarcophagus that we see on the right. And it is absolutely mind-blowing what we see when we look into that. We see this awesome depiction of Hathor, or perhaps Nut, whose body is covered with stars. This is the starry body of the Milky Way to the ancient Egyptians. And along either side of her body, her star body, you see all these figures on boats. And this is, again, expressing this idea that the ancient Egyptian belief in transformation was all about us gaining passage into the Milky Way and climbing aboard our ship of eternity and sailing aboard or sailing upon the waters of the Milky Way forever. So here in the detail, we see this magnificent face of the goddess. We see the figure standing on his boat. And here in the detail that I'm going to show you, we actually see the figure on the boat now. He's got his stick of life in his hand. He's holding a star in his other hand. He's a star being now. He's a celestial being traveling on the ship of eternity as a light being. And now here we see the detail of that gorgeous face of the goddess of the Milky Way, who is widely considered, of course, to be Hathor. Hathor, the goddess of divine love, the goddess of joy. You can always identify her by her flip hairdo, which is what we see here. Very often, you'll see her body filled with stars. Other times, you'll see her represented as a cow. She's the cow goddess. But to the ancient Egyptians, she's not like a cow like you necessarily see walking out in a field. Rather, to the ancient Egyptians, the maternal waters of the heavens, the Milky Way, was to them comparable to a mother's milk. Thus comes the cow symbolism for Hathor. As a celestial cow, she is portrayed with stars on her body. That expression, holy cow, probably originates from this belief that the Milky Way was the great life-giving cow. And from her wondrous milk, called Gala, is where we get the word galaxy. And the ancient Egyptians believed that they could imbibe in this heavenly substance, the maternal waters of the Milky Way, that would, with Abu Simbel, belong to Ramses II and his wife Nefertari. And here we see the great royal wife Nefertari with Hathor as a cow on her ship of eternity amidst the reeds. The reeds is the symbol for the field or the dimension of the blessed. And so here, in a way, we can read this cartoon as simply saying that Nefertari is expressing thanks to the great goddess Hathor for helping her to climb aboard the Ark of the Millions of Years and sail upon this ship of eternity into the field or dimension of the blessed, the field of stars of the Milky Way itself. Absolutely stunning, very beautiful, beautiful image. We see something like this again in the tomb of King Seti. Seti was the father of Ramses the Great. And here we see Hathor, the Milky Way again, presented as a cow. We see Shu once again uplifting the stars, and you can see as he's lifting up his arms, we can see that Hathor's body in the detail here is filled with stars. So this is a depiction of the Milky Way. We have these various figures supporting around the image of Shu, and then the pharaoh, probably Seti, on his ship of eternity, the Ark of the Millions of Years, worshiping or adoring Hathor. And again, suggesting this idea of connecting with the Milky Way and the energies, the life-giving energies of the Milky Way. In ancient Egyptian, this boat, this Ark of the Millions of Years, symbolized the soul. Our soul is the enchanted boat, and it was led by a navigator. And then the boat would become actually the instrument for the soul's exploration in the afterlife. So here's yet another example of the souls on a boat traveling into the celestial realms. This is a kind of a cornerstone, as I say, of the ancient Egyptians' belief in their ability to navigate, first map the afterlife regions, and then navigate them. Here we see a depiction here from the British Museum where we see the hierarchical nature of the Milky Way. We see these kind of stacked or layered worlds or perhaps even dimensions, where the soul starts out in the very bottom of the image, climbing aboard a dual-headed serpent ship that rises out of the waters of life, actually rising out of the Milky Way. We see a ziggurat, or a stairway to heaven, attached to the dual-headed serpent ship. When I first started studying these images, must have been 15 years or so ago now, it clicked in my mind that What they're trying to tell us is that this dual-headed serpent ship that rises out of the waters of the Milky Way is the ship of eternity, and it's also a stairway to heaven. Well, we don't utilize those terms so much these days. Instead, we talk in terms of stargates and wormholes. And I began to piece together this understanding that this is exactly what the ancient Egyptians were talking about, is they described going through various halls or holes in space and navigating the afterlife, the waters of the Milky Way. They were talking about the soul's ability to navigate stargates and wormholes and travel amongst star systems. And this is their whole belief in the afterlife, is that if we achieve this state of purity, we can climb aboard the Ark of the Millions of Years, our ship of eternity, and travel through these stargates or wormholes into other realms. And the key thing was, once again, that the flesh and blood body is not going anywhere. The soul is what ultimately makes this journey. So they weren't concerned about how to take the flesh and blood body through a stargate or a wormhole. They were instead concerned about attaining a sense of purity and perfection. And once they attained that state of purity, they wore these bright white linen garments, as we see here. These symbolize the afterlife garments, the purified light body, if you will, of the ascended beings. These purified garments are shown as linen-like because this is what Osiris wears, the god of resurrection, who's seen here enthroned with Mot standing behind him with the feather, the ostrich feather, coming up the top of her head on her headdress. Osiris wears a tight-fitting linen shroud referred to as the crossed garment, and it symbolizes his purity and the attainment of the light body garment. So whenever we see figures such as the general and his wife that are portrayed here wearing these bright white linen garments, we know that this actually symbolizes their attainment of their light body status. And it's with this light body, now they are dressed appropriately to be able to travel through the halls or holes in space. One of the most interesting things that I find in scenes such as this is Osiris on his throne sitting before the sacred lake. I can't remember the first time I heard this story, but I've heard it half a dozen times since then. And that is this, that when you go to the temples such as Karnak, here was where we're at now in Upper Egypt, you will see a sacred lake accompanying these temples. And there are legends. They're legends, but there's always a kernel of truth in a legend, right? They tell these stories of these locals who suddenly see these golden ships rise up out of the sacred lake. And there are people walking on these sacred lakes, ancient beings walking on the ships. In the story that's told here at Karnak, this figure had seen the ship and waited many years for a reappearance of this golden sacred ship to rise out of the lake. He grabbed a hold of the anchor of the ship and was able to bring enough gold from that ship as it dematerialized back into our dimension that made his family very wealthy for generations. Now, you know, that could be just a fable. It could be just a legend. But when you hear it over and over again at different temples, and the source is, as the storytellers tell us, the source is always someone who knows nothing about, or previously knew nothing about, ancient Egyptian sacred ships, and this belief that the divine beings sailed for eternity on these golden ships. But yet they would see them manifest in these sacred lakes. So for me, when I'm in Egypt and taking a group, always make sure we spend time at the sacred lakes, contemplating, meditating, and reflecting on this possibility that the divine beings are still all amongst us, that we can't see them, but they're there. And they can manifest. And the place where they would manifest, the portals, if you will, of ancient Egypt, are these sacred lakes, because the divine beings sail on these ships of eternity. So it's just something fun for you to think about and to enjoy contemplating as you look at this image, and perhaps even if you go to Egypt. So cycling through here, we'll go through a couple more of these images where you can see this idea communicated to us of the soul rising up out of the waters with as a dual-headed serpent ship with the stairway to heaven attached to it. This gives us a clear idea that the ship that rises is an ascension vehicle. It's a method of conveyance. It's a method of traveling through the stars, even traveling through the afterlife realms. And here we clearly see the throne of Osiris attached to it. And the object of our quest, ultimately, is to gain our place on that ship, on that throne, to become a transformed celestial being. So a couple more examples for you where we see the same layer cake idea of the universe rising into higher dimensions. The ancient Egyptians believed that we would do similar things that we do in earthly life, or rather that in the afterlife we will do similar things that we do in the afterlife, or the other way around. Sorry. Point being, it's about rising, and it's about connecting and navigating the waters of the afterlife. So in all these images, you notice the winding waterway. And what that symbolizes ultimately is their journey into the afterlife and their journey along the winding waterway of the Milky Way itself. And always with these early images of the dual-headed serpent ship with the stairway to heaven attached. And then harvesting, farming, reaping, sowing, and then ultimately meeting with the divine beings in the afterlife realm. The journey is always about crossing over or between unknown realms. And while many associate the soul boat with death, it's actually a symbol of birth, rebirth, and incarnation. As I said earlier, to the ancient Egyptians, the way to heaven was to become a star, to become a star being, a celestial being. And so here we see Ra on his ship of eternity with the sun attached to the star boat, the sun boat, and you see the ladder on the forward part of the boat, indicating that this is the ship of eternity, and that in fact the way to heaven was probably actually through the sun. The ancient Egyptians viewed the sun as a sun tunnel, a star tunnel, or maybe even in our vernacular as a star gate. And in this depiction here from the book of Amduat, or what is in the netherworld, we see Ra's night sea journey as he crosses the underworld in his boat, journeying through a gate filled with stars. We can easily see this as a star gate crossing over into other dimensions. What I did beginning in 2003 is to match the way the ancient Egyptians portrayed the boat of Ra, or the ship of eternity, the ark of the millions of years, is that it matches exactly the way modern science portrays a wormhole. When I first started proposing this, I used to get a lot of flack from the guides in Egypt because Egyptologists, they're all trained Egyptologists, and they don't teach them in Egyptology school that the ancient Egyptians traveled the stars through wormholes. But the more they listened to me, and the more they compared it to what they see on the temple walls and in the various texts, it started to make sense that this is exactly what they're describing as crossing over or through dimensions. And the key thing that the ancient Egyptians knew about these stargates and wormholes is that they were accessed through spiritual means. Today, we are trying to create arcs or boats of eternity. We call them starships. And we want to create warp drives for these starships that enable us to open wormholes that would enable us to cross over or between not just star systems, but maybe even whole galaxies. This is a 1994 image artist depiction, NASA depiction of a wormhole induction propelled spacecraft opening a wormhole. So basically what we see in this cartoon is a craft, a ship of eternity, if you will, crossing over or through a stargate or a wormhole. In my mind, there is no difference between these two depictions. They tell the same story, artistically speaking. A craft is entering a stargate or a wormhole, crossing over or between dimensions or star systems. The difference is, however, in the riders upon the craft, because today NASA doesn't have a spiritual approach per se to space travel. They have a very tin can approach that these technologically advanced craft are going to be able to take flesh and blood bodies through stargates and wormholes. Every single ancient tradition that speaks of divine beings coming and going from the stars says plainly that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of heaven, that only divine or spiritual beings, light beings, are able to make that journey. So we're going to have to see what happens here. NASA believes we're probably less than a generation away of completing one of these warp drives and journeying into the stars in this way. Will we be able to do it without transforming ourselves spiritually? I don't think so, but we'll see. As I said, since 2004, 2003 actually, I've been cataloging the various star boats and comparing them with images of stargates. And I believe that this is exactly what the ancient Egyptians were doing. And we'll come back to that more in just a moment. For the moment, let's bring in another piece to this imagery and this conversation about the ancient Egyptians and their fascination, or if we will, obsession with the Milky Way as a waterway or a canal. One of the oldest names of Egypt was Mera, or Pata Mera, the land of Mera. Ta Meri is another of these names, which literally means place of Mr. And Mr. has been interpreted as a canal or a waterway. The hieroglyph for Mer is a pyramid. A pyramid. Isn't that interesting? The hieroglyph of Mr. or Mer is a pyramid. Egyptologist Mark Lehner has stated that the ancient Kemetian term, the ancient Egyptian term for pyramid, was something he calls Mr. pyramid. He bases this on his translation of Mr. as an instrument or a place of ascension. Well, isn't that interesting? Because what that tells us is that the ancient Egyptians believed their home was an instrument or a place of ascension. That perfectly corresponds with what we've been describing here about their understanding of the sacred boats that enable us to ascend into the heavenly realms. So now, with the pyramid being a hieroglyph or a symbol for Mr., does that mean that that is what the pyramids were? A place of ascension themselves? We should note that the ascension that's referred to here is a metaphysical and a physical one. The pyramid texts, which we will also discuss momentarily, speak of a metaphysical journey of the soul on its way through the field or dimension of the blessed to reach the afterlife. Everything that we see in ancient Egypt relates to this journey and to ascension, in my opinion, including and especially the pyramids. We could spend hours talking about the pyramids. For our purposes, I've chosen just to talk about them briefly here because it's a whole nother conversation. The reason why is because it's so intense and it requires total focus on that subject. And by the way, I should mention here, I was very fortunate to be in the company of Robert Schoch, Dr. Robert Schoch, Dr. J.J. Hertog, Robert Bauval, Regina Meredith, and others, including Desiree Hertog as well, at a conference in Sedona, Arizona, back in May of 2017. They did a magnificent job of synthesizing the most recent knowledge about the pyramids as instruments, and talking in detail about the mathematics of the pyramids. And what was fun about that conference for me is that I was able to present to them what I'm going to be presenting to you in the next hour or so. And it was just great to see the sparks fly and the inspiration flying about how it pieces it all together. When we start talking about the ancient Egyptians and their understanding of ascension and the light body, suddenly the purpose of the pyramids becomes much more clear. It gives us this understanding that this truly was a place of ascension, and the pyramids themselves are instruments of ascension. That's the bottom line, in my opinion, for why the pyramids were built, above all. And that is the purpose that we're going to be discussing them as we continue. This pyramid complex is absolutely mind-blowing. It's almost beyond our comprehension in its magnificence, its splendor. It's just ultimate perfection. And it's also its massiveness. We can't possibly capture the grandeur of this ascension instrument in a photograph. It's just a massive mountain to us. Nobody knows for sure if the pyramid is if it's hollow, if it's solid all the way through. We simply don't know. But lately there's been a lot of conversation about secret chambers behind the chevrons here, which is the actual original entrance to the pyramid. We talk a lot about the king's chamber of the pyramid, and the fact is that there's room for 47 king's chamber sized rooms inside the Great Pyramid. So it's possible that, yeah, there are secret chambers not only behind these chevrons here, but also embedded throughout the Great Pyramid. Standing at this original entrance has been one of the great honors to me in visiting Egypt. One of the reasons I love going so much is that you never know what door is going to open or when. You just have to show up. And on one of our tours, we were fortunate enough to be waved up to the chevrons. And I'm sure it happens to a lot of people, but when it happens to you and you get to go stand in this very holy and sacred entrance to the Great Pyramid, it's a very special, very, very memorable occurrence. I like to point out here that at the entrance to the Great Pyramid is where we see the Akhet sign. The Akhet sign is the symbol of the gateway into the afterlife, the gateway into the heavenly realms, and it reinforces this idea that, yeah, the Great Pyramid is probably some kind of a ascension instrument, a gateway device. The first time that I went into the Great Pyramid, it changed my life. It was in 2003, and I didn't have a whole lot of knowledge about ancient Egypt then. I mean, I had studied it. Egypt is, of course, one of those places that the first time you go, you leave more confused than when you arrived, because it is so overwhelming, so mind-blowing, so absolutely incredible. And your mind is just trying its best to try to keep up with all that you're seeing. And in fact, this is why I advise people when they go to Egypt for the first time, don't do a lot of heavy reading. Don't go all left-brained about it. Don't try to figure it out. Egypt calls you. Egypt has a gift for you. Perhaps you have unfinished business there. Perhaps it's something your soul needs to help to complete its ascension, and just following the trails of the temples and where people have walked for thousands of years might just trigger something within you. So I always encourage saying, just go to Egypt with an open heart and an open mind and just see what happens. And so that's basically what I did the first time I went. And as part of the tour, we went into the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. And after 15 or 20 minutes of just a lot of chatter and excitement about where we were being inside the king's chamber, we finally settled down. And I closed my eyes and took kind of an inventory of where I was at, the most powerful sacred spot in the world, and the building that's actually at the center of the land masses of the planet, it's claimed. And so I just closed my eyes and I started sending out love to my family, my friends, to the whole world, just pretending I was one with this beacon of light and just sending out light and love as best as I could. And all of a sudden, here comes this blue eye out of nowhere in my consciousness. And it was playing with me, is the best way I can describe it. It was beaming bliss at me. And it was just the most wondrous experience. I felt like almost like I was a little child looking up at this wondrous elder, and that this elder was bringing this infantile soul along the way in the best way it could, and just trying to communicate with me. Afterwards, we left the king's chamber, and I asked, hey, did anybody else see this beaming blue eye of bliss? And everybody kind of looked at me funny, like, what happened to you? And it wasn't until later that I realized that what was actually in my consciousness was the blue eye of Horus. And it left me with this really profound sense of having connected with something just absolutely at the core of ancient Egypt, and gave me this impression that this blue eye, this consciousness that I connected with was beyond earthly. It was cosmic. And it made me wonder if perhaps I had connected with some kind of a cosmic being, in fact, that was maybe had a role in the creation of the pyramid, maybe utilized the pyramid as a tool of connection. I knew at that moment that my life would change, and I would try to spend the rest of my life figuring out exactly what happened at that moment. And pleased to say that here I am 14 years later, still trying to figure it out, and enjoying the journey very, very much. But it suggested to me again that there is a cosmic intelligence that's in play with the Great Pyramid, and certainly throughout all of ancient Egypt. I mean, that is the point of these temples, is to act as mirrors or gateways into the heavenly realms. And to think that all of us have the opportunity to go there and to connect with that cosmic intelligence is really and truly a wondrous thing to me. So, according to present-day Egyptology, the Great Pyramid of Giza was allegedly called Akhet Khufu, and allegedly meant the horizon of Khufu. We now know that that's wrong. In his Egyptian hieroglyphic dictionary, the title of the Great Pyramid was Aku, or Akut, meaning light. And when you look up Akut in the hieroglyphic dictionary, Gyges hieroglyphic dictionary, Akut means beings of light, wise, instructed folk. Isn't that interesting? Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval also explain in their book, The Message of the Sphinx, that the hieroglyphs of Aku can also mean transfigured beings, shining ones, or shining beings. Now, that's very powerful because it suggests that the pyramid is a place where humans are transfigured into shining beings, but it also opens up the possibility that those who provided call it the blueprint, the impetus for constructing the pyramid, themselves were the Akut, the beings of light, or wise, instructed folk. Very interested in that concept, especially considering that Aku also means the great light or the sun. In Gyges' dictionary, he gives the additional definitions of Aku, which are to be bright, to be excellent, to be wise, or instructed. And this is very interesting and very important because many pyramid researchers believe that the Great Pyramid, one of the purposes of it is not only as a place of ascension, but as a place of instruction in terms of the mathematics, geometry, the engineering skills that are involved. If we can deconstruct, or if we can rebuild the pyramid in our minds, we will be tapping into the consciousness of the wise, instructed folks who originally built it. Akut also means to be bright, fine, splendid, glorious, and also it has the additional meanings of protection, strength, credit, and renown. Very interesting. So the idea here is that through the pyramid, we could in fact have a way to connect with the shining ones and the wise, instructed folk. Now, something that really intrigues me about the imagery or the hieroglyphs of the shining ones, these instructed folk, is the circle with the dot symbolizing light, with the three rays or the threefold waterway emanating from the circle with the dot. That hieroglyph is seen all over the temples of ancient Egypt. And the interesting thing about it is that it also crosses over into Christian imagery. And part of what my mission is going to be for us during this webinar is to show how the ancient Egyptian Stargate metaphysics crosses over into Christianity, and to take that one step forward and to also show how it crosses over into Tibetan imagery. And my unique approach to looking at or trying to understand the ancient Egyptian Stargate metaphysics is to cross or crisscross the ancient Egyptian, the early Christian, and the Tibetan understanding of the light body or ascension. And one of the first places that we can begin to appreciate this or understand this is to look at the hieroglyph of the Aku and see how it crossed over into the transfiguration images of Jesus. Remember, the circle with the dot with the three rays to the ancient Egyptians symbolizes the shining ones and also transfiguration. And here, in this image from the Coptic church in Aswan, Coptic meaning Egyptian Christian church in Aswan, we see Jesus in a circle of light, an orb of light, with three rays emanating from it. This perfectly matches the Egyptian symbol of the shining ones, of the transfigured ones, or of the Aku. And I don't think that's by chance. I think what it's showing us here symbolically is a first clue of how the ancient Egyptian Stargate metaphysics cross over into Christianity. One of the kind of the most open and important secrets of early Christianity is its Egyptian connection. We know the Holy Family went to Heliopolis, in particular, near the pyramid complex, the Great Pyramid Complex. And we know likely that Jesus spent a large part of his youth in Egypt. What was he doing there? Well, he was probably doing the same things that many of us go to Egypt to do today, to remember, to be trained in the ancient mystery school of the wise instructed folk, of the shining ones. And it would be my speculation that he would have spent some of his time as a youth, we don't know how much, but some of it certainly at Rostov, the Great Pyramid Complex as it was called, Rostov, the place of secrets, and would have been absorbing and being trained in the wisdom teachings of the ancient Egyptians. Rostov, this complex is so magnificent. It's just beyond words. It's beyond even description. The Great Sphinx, this massive carved sculpture that I don't even think we could duplicate it today, carved out of a solid piece of limestone. And you can see that it's in its own enclosure here, where it had been literally carved away. Now, Dr. Robert Schoch, who I mentioned a moment ago, has posited, if not proven, that the erosion that we see on the Sphinx was not caused by sand, as traditional Egyptologists will tell you, that rather it was caused by water. And the last time that ancient Egypt had water of such quantity that could cause this kind of erosion was 10,000 years ago. And Schoch revolutionized the study of the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid when he posited, based on the speculation of previous researchers like Schwaller de Lubitz, and especially at the impetus of John Anthony West, they revolutionized the study of ancient Egypt when they showed that this erosion is caused by water, pushing back the age of the Sphinx and potentially the pyramid itself and the temples near the Sphinx, all the way back to 10,000 BC. We're talking pre-Ice Age times. Absolutely extraordinary. And that work continues. When we look at the stela here in the Sphinx enclosure, it even tells us that this is the holy place of the first time of creation, what was called the Zep Tepi. So if we take the Egyptians at their own word, they're telling us that this is the most ancient place. This is the place of creation. And then it supports this idea that the Sphinx is in fact 10,000 years old, or maybe even older. Not built in 2500 BC, as has been speculated by Egyptologists or put forward by Egyptologists, but 10,000 BC. And I have to tell you that to be able to enter into the Sphinx enclosure is one of the great experiences anyone can have. Even greater, in my personal opinion, and that of many people that have traveled with us, it's even greater than going inside the Great Pyramid itself. There's just something spectacularly special about being able to go into the Sphinx enclosure. Maybe it has to do with the allure of the Hall of Records idea. And Dr. Schock, in his presentation at Sedona, clearly showed us that there are hollow cavities around the Sphinx. There's no question about it. And the Egyptological authorities, they don't want you to know about that, because that starts to open up the possibility that speculative researchers like Spencer Lewis, prophets or sleeping prophets, as he's called, Edgar Cayce, are right, that buried underneath the Sphinx are these enclosures, maybe even temples, and that you can gain access to these temples, and that perhaps they do house what Edgar Cayce referred to as an Atlantean Hall of Records. It's such an alluring idea. But ever since the late 90s, again, with the impetus of the Edgar Cayce Foundation, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, the work of John Anthony West, the work of Robert Schock, and others, we're coming upon this awareness that these ideas put forward by Cayce and Spencer Lewis actually do hold water. There's definitely more to be discovered beneath and around the Sphinx enclosure. As I said a moment ago, the Sphinx is carved out of a single piece of rock, and it's carved out of this enclosure that we see around it. And here you can see the water erosion on that enclosure. Then the question becomes, well, what happened to the rock that they cut out from around the Sphinx? And the answer is they built the Sphinx Temple and the Valley Temple that's right in front of the Sphinx. This is a view from the paws of the Sphinx, looking at this, what's known as, this is a view where we see the paws of the Sphinx from the side of what's called the Sphinx Temple, composed of these massive limestone blocks. And according to Dr. Schock, they've done tests that have proven that these limestone blocks that we're looking at are the very same blocks that came out of the Sphinx enclosure. So very, very interesting to speculate then, or to suggest that this temple itself has to be as old as the Sphinx. And perhaps it is underneath this or within this at one time that we would have found the Hall of Records itself. So now we're looking towards the Sphinx through an opening in this Sphinx temple. The whole area in front of the Sphinx is loaded with some of the smoking gun type evidence of advanced and precision machining used by the ancient Egyptians. Look at this, you see this massive pink granite block that's just sitting in front of the Sphinx temple, perfectly polished, rounded. It was actually a corniche that would have been placed on top of the Sphinx temple. It was a facing stone. And here it's just an out of place artifact, hidden in plain sight, that is remarkable to behold, and just truly a piece of ancient Egyptian wonderment, if you will. How are they able to smooth out this perfectly smooth granite? How are they able to round it in this way? It's one of these great unanswered questions of ancient Egypt. And it's possible that this is original to the Sphinx temple when it was built. However, we're also open to the possibility that it was added much later. So great mysteries await us when we visit the pause of the Sphinx and the Sphinx temple and looking back to the pyramid. Literally, people have and one can spend a lifetime trying to apprehend the mysteries of this instrument or tool of ascension. And I think that's a great way to spend a life. For me, it's again such an honor to have seen it on so many occasions from different angles with so many different people. And I always, when we finish a tour, it's always between the pause of the Sphinx, and my message is always the same. I ask the Sphinx to bless us, and ask the Sphinx to allow us to return to Egypt for one more opportunity to take a pass through these incredible monuments. Of course, next to the Sphinx, and you see the Sphinx in the upper right, is what's called the Valley Temple. They describe it as a mortuary temple. Once again, it's composed or faced by these giant red granite blocks, another place of immense mystery. It's important to acknowledge the Valley Temple because, again, we could be looking at a temple that's 10,000 years old. They used some kind of a tool or technique that enabled them to make these rounded corners out of these red granite blocks, always a sense of wonder. They were able to just wield some kind of a method where they could manipulate these stones in ways that we can't even do today. Almost like they were giants placing Lego blocks, or relatively speaking, they're so big they can handle these blocks like we handle Lego blocks today. They just clearly had a different way of thinking and a different way of connecting and working with stone than we have today. So very, very powerful understanding awaits us as we study this. I'm going to skip over these next few slides, and we'll come back to this here in just a moment. But for the moment, I just want you to think about what is still buried underneath the Great Pyramid. What awaits our discovery here in this magnificent complex, bearing in mind that most of this was covered in sand less than 100 years ago. And through our super advanced technology, satellite imagery, we're now discovering pyramids all the time. Hundreds of them have been discovered around the world. And we're starting to piece together this understanding that our ancient forebears had this massive network of ascension instruments that perhaps were part of a network that tuned the planet, raised or elevated the frequency of the planet, and ultimately could have been used as ascension tools or portals or gateways themselves. And we should count ourselves among the privileged to have as much knowledge as we do today about these incredible structures, and get this sense of excitement that we may be this close to remembering. And that's why everybody who connects with it becomes part of the consciousness then of they who built it, and helps us to remember that ultimate purpose and the consciousness that is so important for us to recover today. Because if we can, I believe, recover the consciousness of the ancient Egyptians, it will enable us to catapult ourselves forward into a new way of living based on ascension rather than a quest for immortality, a quest for cosmic consciousness rather than a quest for power consciousness, a quest to live by the power of love rather than a quest to live for the love of power. So it is now 15 minutes after the hour. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and we'll come back then at the bottom of the hour and take ourselves into the next chapter of our journey, where we'll start to really investigate directly the light body secrets of the ancient Egyptians. I hope you've enjoyed what we've looked at so far. Don't go away. Enjoy your break. I'll see you in 15 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everybody, and thank you once again for joining us. In this segment, we're going to start to look at the light body consciousness of the ancient Egyptians. And this dovetails with work actually that I've been doing on artificial intelligence and transhumanism. So just going to give you just a slight amount of that, just put some flavor into this, and also to show you the importance of what is happening at this moment right now in terms of the transformation of Homo sapiens into a transhuman version, or a version of ourselves that has our flesh enmeshed with technology and our brains enmeshed with computers in an effort to advance our species. Remember, ancient Egypt is founded on the idea, or the ancient Egyptian Stargate metaphysics, rather, is founded on the idea that humans can transform into something more, something better, a celestial or a star being. And I propose that what's happening in Silicon Valley and elsewhere today is an answer to this ancient call that the ancient Egyptians had answered for human transformation into divine beings. And I believe that we are the bridge between two different humans. And the choices that we are making at this moment will affect humanity forever. Have you ever seen one of these before? It's, of course, an image of the human brain, the neocortex, to be specific. The cerebral cortex of our brain is that outer covering of the gray matter of our brain's two hemispheres. And most of that is the neocortex, loaded with these guys here, brain cells that we all could use just a few more of, right? Latin for new bark, the neocortex is our third newly human brain in terms of evolution. The thing about it is there's a great mystery about our neocortex and how it was activated. And I think the ancient Egyptians have an answer to that question, and that's what we're going to get to here in just a moment. If we think of our spinal cord as the tree with the brain on top, the neocortex is the new bark. The neocortex, says Dr. Carl Sagan in his iconic book Cosmos, is also where matter is transformed into consciousness. Where the skull divides, there lies the gate of God, says the Upanishads. And that's, again, what the ancient Egyptians were ultimately seeking, was the gate of God. The neocortex is what makes possible our judgments and our knowledge of good and evil. It's the site from which our creativity emerges, and it's our home to our true sense of self. This is a beautiful image by Greg Dunn called Self-Reflected, that was made using an elaborate combination of hand drawing, deep neuroscientific research, algorithmically simulated neurocircuitry, brain scan data, gilding, and so forth. Stunning. The realm of intuition, critical analysis, it's the neocortex where we have our ideas, our inspirations, our creativity, where our music comes from, everything. As Sagan says, it is the distinction of our species, the seed of our humanity. And humanity, or civilization, is the product of our cerebral cortex. Now, according to Dr. John Hofecker, an archaeologist at the University of Colorado here in Boulder, where I am, the neocortex was mysteriously switched on, charged, or awakened, my terms, only 75,000 years ago. In fact, as he has documented, there is archaeological evidence for the evolution of a human superbrain, a brain capable of, or humans interacting with one another in a super consciousness, no later than 75,000 years ago. So something happened 75,000 years ago in order to trigger this awakening and the emergence of the neocortex and the fully modern human. What exactly was that? Here in Michelangelo's painting, he's got famously God transmitting something to Adam, maybe the divine Sophia, as he is portrayed here, the divine feminine wisdom. But whatever happened at that moment spurred a modern capacity for judgment, but also a capacity for novelty and invention, leading today to today's invention of the internet, which is what we see here. A device that's now capable of linking billions of brains into one global superbrain. Today, artificial intelligence experts, transhumanists talk about neural dust or smart dust, tiny particles of nanotechnology that have a brain that wire us remotely to the Internet of Things. And they are now talking about a new superhuman based on transhuman technology. Elon Musk of Tesla fame has now proposed a Neuralink, a device that links our brain to artificially intelligent computers. I mean, it's way beyond the scope of a typical Egyptological or Egypt-based conversation, but it's important to recognize that this is how advanced we are today. And the answer for how we got this advanced, I believe, can be found in Egypt. We're just about there. In a TED Talk given in 2010, UCLA neuroscientist V.S. Ramachandran observed that about 75,000 years ago, the same date as John Hoppecker, that there was a sudden emergence and rapid spread of skills unique to human beings, like the use of tools and the use of fire, shelters, use of language, plus the ability to read one another's minds and interpret behavior or intentions. All of this happened basically at once, out of the blue, he says. So what occurred to make this happen? The hardware of our brain capacity was already in place 200,000 years ago. So what happened around 75,000 years ago? Ramachandran claims it was the sudden appearance of mirror neurons in the neocortex that allowed us to imitate and emulate one another's actions. Mirror neurons enable us to learn very quickly. It's like monkey see, monkey do type of learning, where people can learn very quickly and pass it along, whereas before it might have taken generations for knowledge to be passed along. Suddenly, it's able to be shared virtually instantly. So what if it was the mirror neurons? Something activated the mirror neurons, but what was that? Carl Sagan thought it could have been cosmic rays coming from Cygnus. Very interesting speculation. Cooking meat, psychedelic substances, climate change, scientists say all are involved in activating the neocortex. But why not cosmic visitors, as the ancient Sumerians and the Egyptians claimed? That's funny, complained. Why not extraterrestrial visitors who infused humanity with a light or a vibration and transmitted the secrets of activating the neocortex and maybe even more to us? This theory, this understanding that our neocortex was not switched on until 75,000 years ago places the arrival of the ancient Egyptian divine beings, the gods, also called the Watchers, sometime after 75,000 years ago. What would be the point of them coming here before that?
And Wade and everyone, appreciate it.
Maybe, as this line of research suggests, it was they themselves who knew that the neocortex was ready for their arrival, not just because they were watching us, but because they were the ones who actually activated our neocortex. Maybe they had a role in switching it on to begin with. This is what makes images such as this from the tomb of Ramses II
thank you for watching.
So intriguing to me.
I'm just going to sign
where
off.
we see on the left Thoth, the god of divine magic and alchemy, standing on one side of Ramses II inside the Persea tree or tree of life. And on the other side, we see Ptah, the ancient Egyptian god of technology.
Appreciate it very much.
Is this depicting a moment in which the
cerebral
cortex was activated? Are we looking at a scene here where the divine beings